Welcome to the Divorce Podcast, where we explore relationships, divorce, separation, and parenting apart. This episode is part of our new mini-series where we answer your questions and share practical bite-sized tips. I'm your host, Kate Daly, a relationship counsellor, divorce specialist, and co-founder of Amicable, the online legal service for separating couples. Today, I'm going to talk about moving on without getting closure when you don't know the reason for a divorce or a breakup. I know this is a really common problem and one that you have very little control over. So I thought it'd be good just to dig a little bit deeper into why this happens so that you can understand a little bit more about how you can move on if you're in a situation where your ex hasn't given you a reason for the end of the relationship. Lots of people experience this kind of breakup, and it's not ideal, but we rarely talk about it very openly. And if your ex has ended a relationship or marriage and doesn't give you a real reason why, it's really important because it might bring up very difficult issues and feelings that seem to make it impossible to move on. So how do we navigate that without getting that much needed closure? Well, first of all, let's try and understand why this is happening. And remember, this is often more about them than it is about you. So perhaps it's about their own emotional avoidance. Sometimes people end relationships without an explanation because facing the reason for the breakdown of the marriage and facing the feelings that that brings up for them, perhaps guilt or conflict, is very difficult emotion, and they don't like processing that emotion. So they avoid it and don't take responsibility by basically bringing down a wall of silence. So perhaps for them, it's been a pattern where they don't confront their own feelings or they don't take ownership of their part in the relationship. And that usually has led to the breakdown of the relationship in the first place. So emotional avoidance is one of the most common reasons for ending up in a situation without closure. Another alternative is sometimes people aren't quite as emotionally in tune with their own feelings. And so they may not understand fully their own reasons for ending the relationship. And this is tricky because, it might seem very clear to you, or it might just be that you would like to have a conversation to explore that exact point. But that can be overwhelming. And that's not to excuse this behavior, but just to try and shine a light on it. So if they don't understand or can't put words to their own emotions, it might be impossible for them to come to a conversation and to sit down and have that conversation about why the relationship has come to its end. It might be extremely frustrating for you, and it might be impossible for them to give you any kind of closure. But sometimes we have to accept that people aren't able to articulate how they're feeling or to give us a clear explanation. And more frustratingly, they're not willing to try and tease that out with us. Why is this important? It's important to get closure because it often helps us move on. So that feeling of not having it can really hang around like a bad smell, and it can leave us wondering and it can leave us in a state of limbo. So it's important to acknowledge sometimes that that is what is happening, because acknowledging it is one of the ways that we can overcome that stuck feeling and that feeling of limbo. Waiting for answers that never come is what keeps you hanging on and keeps you engaged in a relationship and trying to get the answers to the questions. But sometimes that can be very futile and it can waste a lot of time and energy. Not knowing why doesn't mean that you can't heal and move forward. It just means you need to take a different pathway to that which you may have expected to, where you can process the emotions, you can process the reasons and move on yourself. If your ex-partner is unable to give you that closure you need, you might be able to get it in a different way. So let's have a look at that, because it's really important that if you're not getting what you need from your partner, you find alternative professionals who might be able to help. So it could be that you find a counsellor, and a counsellor will help by allowing you to talk through the situation, to express the feelings that you have, and to express your frustrations, and to be a sounding board for the what ifs and the whys. And a really good professional counsellor is excellent at doing that because they won't give you answers. They won't make up answers to make you feel better, but they'll help guide you to a place where you can accept the not knowing and where you may be able to think about it from your perspective and find reasons why the relationship needed to move on and change anyway. And that can be incredibly helpful in the healing journey. Some tips then for dealing with a lack of closure. The first thing is to acknowledge your own feelings. Name what you're feeling. You can do this by writing a letter to yourself or writing a letter to the other person, not one that you ever send, but one that acknowledges how you feel and goes through a path of this is how you feel, this is the disappointment. You can work through the different emotions that often help you stay in that stuck position. And working through those emotions, writing out your feelings about them can actually help to unblock you. And there are loads of templates out there that you can use. You can burn them, screw them up, cut them up, whatever you want to do, delete them, whatever. But don't send them. They're letters for you and they're tools to process your own emotion. And writing is a really good way of processing that emotion. So, an alternative to writing letters either to yourself or to the other person that you don't send is journaling. So, journaling is a really good way of working through how you feel. And it works because writing things down actually has a much better way of releasing those emotions rather than just thinking them in your head. Actually, writing them down helps you process them because you're transferring them from a feeling to a cognition. And it's thought that that transfer from one state to another is what helps to process the emotion, the same way that talking is a transfer of a feeling into a verbal. Then it's the same thing. If you can't or don't want to speak to somebody and don't want to go to a therapist, then writing is also a good way of moving those feelings along. Grounding yourself. It's very easy to get lost in some of these painful emotions, and it's very easy to keep going around the same loop when you don't have an answer and you don't know. But coming up with new routines and focusing on connecting, whether that's with other people, so friends and family, whether it's connecting with an activity or a hobby, or whether it's connecting with nature by going out and walking or breathing in the air or doing the breathing exercises. But that sense of grounding yourself and trying to still your mind and just stepping back, and it's a process known as observing your own feelings. So there are brilliant apps out there that teach mindfulness and that teach you how to do this. But just being able to stand slightly back from your feelings and observe the feelings that you're having and name them and see them rather than just being lost in them and allowing them to hijack your brain at the most inconvenient moments, which we know they do. It's always the moment when you have to go and do a presentation at work or you've got a difficult piece of something you've got to concentrate on, that all of a sudden an emotion will come in and hijack you. And it just creates, it just drives a bus through your day. So being able to set time aside where you can actually observe how you're feeling and ground yourself is a really useful way to take back some of that control. I think another tip is to create your own version of closure. If you've gone beyond writing down just how you're feeling, you can go to a next stage, which is really writing to yourself about the closure that you are seeking and the closure that you have. You can write this, and the way to do this is to write to your future self. So the person who's already healed, considering what you know was true about the relationship, what you can celebrate about that relationship, what the relationship didn't give you, but you can be sanguine about, is also a really good technique for moving on. So, creating that version of closure by writing to your future self and acknowledging what was good and not so good about the relationship in that more reflective way will help bring a sense of closure that you might not get just by processing your emotions and talking to a therapist or writing a letter about your feelings. So it's definitely kind of a next stage. And you probably do need to process those raw emotions before you get to that stage. The other thing to remember is there are lots of people around you who love you and support you. And whether that's reaching out to somebody who can professionally support you, such as a therapist, or whether it's just spending some more time with a close friend and scheduling that conversation with them. So I really need to talk about this, and knowing that you're not going to be a bore and talk about it every single time you go out, but you're just booking some time with somebody close to you who will listen whilst you go through this particular phase of the breakup and trying to seek the closure. That's really important. These people are your friends. They love you. They'll do anything to support you, and they'll listen with an open heart. And you can say to them, I don't need you to say anything. I don't need you to jump in with both feet and blame my ex for all the things he or she never did. I just need you to bear witness to me as I go through this in my mind, and just priming them and letting them know they don't need to do anything is just quite an important part of the process. So, talking through your feelings, expressing them out loud, and getting closure that way, and feeling heard by somebody, even if it's not the person you would ideally want it to be, your ex, that can be a very good supportive process for helping you find the closure that you seek. I hope you found this useful, just in terms of working through how to get closure when you can't get it from the person that you really want it from. Finally, we'd love to know how we can help more. So please share your questions on divorce, separation and co-parenting with us at hello@amicable.co.uk. You never know, they might be the topic of the next episode. Thank you for listening.